The story begins with a young girl stepping into a world she knows nothing about. 16-year-old Emily is quiet, reserved, and unsure of herself as she walks through the grand iron gates of St. Augustine's Academy for the first time. This isn't just any school. It's one of those places where everyone seems to have their lives figured out, from perfect grades to polished appearances. Her dad, a high-ranking Army officer, had insisted she attend this prestigious boarding school after his recent promotion. He believed it would help her grow stronger, more disciplined, and ready for life's challenges. Emily, however, wasn't so sure. She clutched her bag tightly, feeling out of place among the other students who seemed confident and well-prepared. The hallways were lined with portraits of past valedictorians, all smiling brightly in crisp uniforms. Everything about the school screamed order: strict schedules, rigid rules, and zero tolerance for anything that didn't fit its idea of perfection. Emily felt like an outsider already, but what worried her most was how much attention people paid to appearances here. Her long, wavy hair cascaded down her back, framing her face softly. It was something she took pride in, not because it made her stand out, but because it reminded her of her mom. Her mother used to sit behind her every morning before school, brushing her hair and braiding it carefully while humming old songs. Those moments were some of her happiest memories. After her mom passed away, Emily kept her hair long as a way to hold on to those precious times. It was more than just strands of hair. It was a connection to the person she loved most. On her very first day, Emily met Ms. Langley, the headmistress. She was tall, stern-looking, and carried herself with an air of authority that intimidated even the teachers. As she gave the new students a tour of the campus, her sharp eyes scanned the group, landing on Emily almost immediately. When she noticed Emily's hair, her lips pressed into a thin line. "We value discipline and uniformity here," she said, loudly, glancing pointedly at Emily. "Anything distracting will not be tolerated." Emily froze, her cheeks burning red. She hadn't expected such scrutiny so soon. Later, during orientation, Ms. Langley reiterated the importance of adhering to the school's strict grooming policies. While others nodded along, Emily couldn't shake off the uneasy feeling that settled in her chest. She wondered if she'd ever truly belong in a place like this. As the day went on, Emily found herself sitting alone in the cafeteria, picking at her food. That's when another student approached her, a bubbly girl with short, curly hair and a warm smile. "Hey, I'm Lila," she introduced herself cheerfully. "You're new, right? Don't worry, everyone feels lost on their first day." Lila quickly became Emily's only friend in the overwhelming sea of unfamiliar faces. Over lunch, they talked about their families, hobbies, and dreams. Lila shared stories about how tough the school could be, but assured Emily that things got easier once you found your footing. For the first time since arriving, Emily felt a flicker of hope. But despite Lila's reassurances, Emily couldn't ignore the looming presence of Ms. Langley. Every time the headmistress walked by, her gaze lingered on Emily's hair, making her self-conscious. Deep down, Emily knew trouble was brewing. Little did she know it would come sooner and hit harder than she ever imagined. The days at St. Augustine's Academy rolled by, each one blending into the next like a monotonous rhythm. Emily tried her best to adjust, but the weight of Ms. Langley's disapproving stares never left her mind. Every morning as she brushed her hair and tied it neatly, she couldn't shake the feeling that it was somehow wrong, like wearing bright colors in a world painted only in gray. Her long locks, which had once been her comfort, now felt like a target. Lila noticed how tense Emily had become. "You're overthinking it," she said one afternoon during gym class. They were sitting on the bleachers, catching their breath, after a grueling session of volleyball. "Ms. Langley just likes to intimidate people. Don't let her get to you." Emily sighed, running her fingers through her ponytail. "It's not just that," she admitted softly. "She keeps looking at me like I've done something wrong, like my hair is some kind of crime." Lila tilted her head thoughtfully. "Maybe you should talk to her, clear the air or something." Emily shook her head quickly. No way, she'd probably make things worse. But deep down, Emily knew Lila was right. Ms. Langley wasn't going to forget about her anytime soon. And sure enough, Trouble found its way to her sooner than expected. It happened during gym class 2 days later. The students were required to wear specific uniforms, plain white t-shirts and navy blue shorts. Emily had double-checked her outfit before heading to the locker room, making sure everything was perfectly in place. But when she bent down to tie her shoelaces mid-game, her shirt slipped slightly, revealing a tiny sliver of her sports bra underneath. It was barely noticeable, a fraction of an inch, but it was enough for Ms. Langley, who happened to be supervising the session. "Emily Carter." The voice cut through the noise like a knife. Everyone stopped what they were doing and turned to look. Ms. Langley stood near the edge of the court, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her face was unreadable, but her tone left no room for argument. "Come here now." Emily's stomach dropped. She walked slowly toward the headmistress, her heart pounding in her ears. When she reached her, Ms. Langley leaned in close, her voice low but sharp. "Do you think this is acceptable behavior?" she hissed, gesturing at Emily's exposed skin. "We have standards here, standards that must be upheld." It was an accident," Emily stammered, her cheeks flushing red. "I didn't mean to. Accidents are no excuse," Ms. Langley interrupted, straightening up. Her gaze swept across the group of students watching silently. "Let this serve as a lesson to all of you. Discipline is non-negotiable. Rules exist for a reason, and breaking them has consequences." Emily swallowed hard, bracing herself for whatever punishment was coming her way. But nothing could have prepared her for what Ms. Langley said next. "You will shave your head." The words hit like a punch to the gut. Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by stunned silence. Emily blinked, convinced she'd misheard. "What?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You heard me," Ms. Langley replied coldly. "If you wish to remain a student at St. Augustine's, you will comply. Your refusal to adhere to our dress code shows a lack of respect for authority. This is your chance to correct that." For a moment, Emily felt like the ground beneath her feet had crumbled away. Her mind raced, trying to process what was happening. Shave her head? Over. A minor slip-up? It felt absurd, cruel even. But the look on Ms. Langley's face told her there would be no negotiation. Lila stepped forward suddenly, her fists clenched. "That's insane. You can't do that to her." Ms. Langley's eyes narrowed dangerously. "Stay out of this, Miss Thompson, unless you'd like to join her." Lila hesitated, shooting Emily a worried glance before stepping back reluctantly. Emily forced herself to stay calm, though inside she was trembling. She wanted to scream, to argue, to tell Ms. Langley exactly what she thought of her ridiculous demands. But years of being taught to respect authority held her tongue. Instead, she simply nodded, too overwhelmed to say anything. Later that evening, as Emily sat alone in her dorm room staring at her reflection in the mirror, tears streamed down her face. She ran her hands through her hair, imagining it gone, her last connection to her mother erased forever. How could anyone expect her to go through with this? Yet saying no meant leaving the school entirely, and if she left, her father would surely blame her for failing yet again. Her thoughts spiraled until there was a soft knock at the door. It was Lila, carrying 2 steaming cups of hot chocolate. Without a word, she handed one to Emily and sat down beside her. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then Lila broke the silence. "You don't deserve this," she said firmly. "No one does. There has to be a way to fight back." Emily sniffled, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "How?" "She's the headmistress. She makes the rules." Lila frowned, tapping her chin thoughtfully. "Rules can be broken, or at least bent, if you know where to look. We need proof that she's unfair, something concrete." "What do you mean?" Emily asked, confused. "I mean, we sneak into her office," Lila whispered, leaning closer. "Find evidence of other ridiculous punishments she's handed out. If we can show everyone how unreasonable she is, maybe we can stop her." Emily's eyes widened. Sneaking into the headmistress's office sounded impossible and dangerous, But as she looked at Lila's determined expression, a spark of hope flickered inside her. Maybe, just maybe, they could turn the tables on Ms. Langley. That night, as the clock struck midnight, Emily and Lila found themselves huddled in the shadows of the deserted hallway outside Ms. Langley's office. The school was eerily quiet, save for the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead. Their hearts pounded like drums, each breath shallow and deliberate. Neither of them had ever done anything remotely rebellious before, but desperation had pushed them to this point. "This is insane," Emily whispered, clutching a small flashlight in her sweaty palm. "What if we get caught?" Lila adjusted the strap of her backpack, trying to look braver than she felt. "We won't. Not if we're careful. Besides, do you really want to let her win? Let her take your hair without a fight?" Emily hesitated, glancing back toward the dorms where safety lay just a few corridors away. But then she thought about her mother, about the countless mornings spent braiding her hair together, laughing and talking about everything under the sun. That memory hardened her resolve. No way was she letting Ms. Langley strip her of something so precious without putting up a fight. "Okay," Emily said finally, nodding. "Let's do this." The door to Ms. Langley's office loomed ahead, solid and imposing. It wasn't locked. Administrative offices rarely were, but the sheer audacity of what they were about to do made it feel like breaking into a fortress. Lila gently pushed the door open, wincing at the faint creak it made. They slipped inside, closing it behind them with painstaking care. Inside, the office was dimly lit by the glow of streetlights filtering through the blinds. Shelves lined the walls, crammed with binders, folders, and stacks of papers. A massive, wooden desk dominated the center of the room, its surface cluttered with documents and a sleek laptop. Lila tiptoed over to the shelves while Emily stood guard near the door, her ears straining for any sound that might indicate someone was coming. "Look for anything labeled disciplinary records or something like that," Lila instructed in a barely audible voice. She started rifling through the binders, her fingers trembling slightly. Emily joined her moments later, scanning titles on spines and pulling out anything that seemed relevant. It didn't take long to find what they were looking for. Buried, deep within one of the folders, was a collection of incident reports detailing punishments handed out over the years. As they flipped through the pages, their eyes widened in disbelief. One student had been suspended for wearing mismatched socks. Another was forced to write an apology letter to the entire faculty after accidentally stepping on a teacher's foot during assembly. And there were more. Dozens of cases where Ms. Langley had imposed extreme measures for minor infractions. This is unbelievable," Emily muttered, holding up a page that described how a girl was banned from all extracurricular activities because her skirt hem was half an inch too short. "She's not enforcing rules. She's terrorizing people." Lila nodded grimly, stuffing the incriminating documents into her backpack. "This is exactly what we need. With this, we can prove she's abusing her power. Everyone will see her for who she really is." But just as they were about to leave, a noise froze them in their tracks. Footsteps echoed down the hallway, growing louder with each second. Someone was coming, and they weren't alone. Panic surged through Emily as she glanced around the room, searching for a place to hide. Spotting a narrow gap between two filing cabinets, she tugged Lila toward it, whispering, urgently, "Quick! Over here!" They squeezed themselves into the tight space, holding their breath as the footsteps drew closer. The door creaked open again, and a beam of light swept across the room. It was Ms. Langley herself, accompanied by another teacher, whose face neither of them recognized. From their hiding spot, Emily and Lila could only catch snippets of their conversation. "I forgot my notes for tomorrow's meeting," Ms. Langley said briskly, heading straight for her desk. "Make sure no one disturbs me while I retrieve them." The other teacher mumbled something in response before retreating back into the hallway. Emily's pulse raced as she watched Ms. Langley rifle through her drawers, completely oblivious to the two girls hiding just feet away. Every movement felt amplified, the rustle of paper, the scrape of a chair, even the soft click of Ms. Langley's heels against the floorboards. Finally, after what felt like hours, Ms. Langley grabbed a folder and turned to leave. Just as she reached the door, however, she paused, her gaze sweeping suspiciously around the room. For a terrifying moment, Emily thought she'd spotted them. But then she shook her head slightly, muttering, "Must be imagining things," before stepping out and closing the door behind her. As soon as the coast was clear, Emily and Lila scrambled out of their hiding spot, their legs stiff and cramped. They didn't waste another second, grabbing the evidence and slipping out of the office as quietly as they'd entered. Once they were safely back in Emily's dorm room, they collapsed onto the bed, hearts still racing. "We actually did it," Lila said, grinning despite her exhaustion. "We got the proof. Now all we have to do is figure out how to use it." Emily nodded, clutching the stolen folder tightly. For the first time since arriving at St. Augustine's, she felt a flicker of control returning to her life. Ms. Langley wasn't invincible, not anymore. The next morning, Emily woke up with a mix of emotions swirling inside her. On one hand, she felt a strange sense of empowerment. She and Lila had managed to pull off something bold, something that could potentially change everything. But on the other hand, fear gnawed at her stomach like a relentless ache. What if Ms. Langley found out? What if someone realized they'd been in her office last night? The thought alone made her hands tremble as she got ready for the day. Lila, however, seemed unfazed. She bounced into Emily's room just as the sun was rising, clutching the folder filled with incriminating evidence. "We need a plan," she said firmly, sitting cross-legged on Emily's bed. "This stuff is gold, but we can't just throw it out there without thinking it through." Emily nodded, though her mind was still racing. "You're right. We need to figure out who we can trust. Someone who has the power to do something about this." They spent the next hour brainstorming ideas, weighing pros and cons. They considered going directly to the principal, but neither of them trusted him. He always seemed too eager to please Ms. Langley. Then Lila suggested reaching out to parents. "Your dad's an army general, isn't he?" she asked, her eyes lighting up. "If anyone can make Ms. Langley back off, it's him." Emily hesitated. Her father wasn't exactly known for his leniency. He believed in following rules and respecting authority figures no matter what. Telling him about their late-night escapade might not go over well. Still, she couldn't deny that he cared deeply about fairness. It was one of the few things he never compromised on. If he knew how unfairly Ms. Langley treated students, maybe he'd step in. "Okay," Emily said finally. "But I'll handle talking to my dad. You focus on keeping this safe until then." She gestured toward the folder, which Lila clutched, protectively. By lunchtime, rumors were already spreading through the school like wildfire. Somehow word had gotten out that Emily was refusing to shave her head despite Ms. Langley's ultimatum. Whispers followed her wherever she went, some sympathetic, others mocking. A group of girls giggled loudly as she passed by, one of them saying, "Guess she thinks she's special, huh?" Emily clenched her fists, forcing herself to keep walking. She hated being the center of attention, especially when it was negative. But she reminded herself why she was doing this. For her mom, for herself, and now for every student who'd ever been bullied or humiliated by Ms. Langley. Later that afternoon, disaster struck. As Emily sat in the library trying to study, Lila burst in looking frantic. "We've got a problem," she hissed, pulling Emily aside. "Ms. Langley knows something's up. She called me into her office during break and started asking questions about you, about us." Emily's heart sank. "What did you say?" "I played dumb," Lila replied quickly. But she didn't look convinced. She even threatened to search lockers if she finds anything suspicious. Fear gripped Emily again. If Ms. Langley decided to investigate further, it wouldn't take long for her to discover the missing folder. Or worse, connect the dots back to them. They needed to act fast. That evening after dinner, Emily pulled out her phone and dialed her father's number. It rang twice before his deep, commanding voice came through the line. "Emily, is everything all right?" She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "Dad, I need your help." Her father paused, concern creeping into his tone. "What's wrong?" For the next 10 minutes, Emily poured her heart out, explaining everything. The strict rules, Ms. Langley's unreasonable demands, the ultimatum to shave her head, and their risky mission to expose her unfairness. To her relief, her father listened patiently, only interrupting once or twice to ask clarifying questions. When she finished, there was a long silence on the other end of the line. Finally, her father spoke, his voice firm but surprisingly calm. "Emily, I'm proud of you for standing your ground, but sneaking around and breaking rules isn't the answer. Let me handle this. Send me whatever proof you have and I'll make sure justice is served." Relief washed over Emily like a tidal wave. She hadn't realized how much weight she'd been carrying until her father stepped in to shoulder some of it. "Thank you, Dad." The auditorium was dead silent, save for the faint hum of the air conditioning. Every student, teacher, and staff member stared at General Carter as if he were a storm cloud rolling in, powerful, unpredictable, and impossible to ignore. Ms. Langley stood frozen on stage, her usual composure shattered under the weight of his piercing gaze. For the first time since Emily had met her, the headmistress looked small, almost fragile. General Carter didn't raise his voice or make dramatic gestures. Instead, he spoke calmly, but firmly, each word landing like a hammer strike. "Ms. Langley," he began, taking a step closer to the stage, "I've reviewed the documents sent to me. They paint a troubling picture, students penalized harshly for trivial mistakes, punishments that seem designed not to correct behavior but to humiliate. Is this true?" Ms. Langley blinked rapidly, clearly struggling to regain control of the situation. She straightened her posture, attempting to summon some semblance of authority. "Sir, these matters are internal. I assure you, all disciplinary actions are taken with the best interests of the students in mind." "Best interests?" General Carter repeated, his tone sharp enough to cut glass. "Forcing a child to shave her head because of a minor dress code violation? That doesn't sound like discipline. It sounds like cruelty. And it certainly doesn't align with the values this institution claims to uphold." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some students exchanged wide-eyed glances while others nodded subtly in agreement. Emily sat rigid in her seat, her heart pounding wildly. She'd never seen her father like this before. Commanding yet composed, every movement deliberate, every word calculated. It was as though he wasn't just defending her. He was dismantling Ms. Langley's entire facade piece by piece. Ms. Langley tried to recover, her voice wavering slightly. "With respect, sir, rules exist to maintain order. Without them, chaos would ensue." "Order is important," General Carter conceded, folding his arms across his chest. "But so is fairness. Discipline should teach, not punish indiscriminately. From what I've seen, your approach borders on abuse. Or perhaps you'd care to explain why shaving a young girl's head is necessary for maintaining order." Ms. Langley opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. Her face flushed red, and she glanced nervously at the principal, who sat quietly in the front row, avoiding eye contact. The silence stretched uncomfortably, broken only by the rustle of papers when someone shifted in their seat. Seizing the moment, General Carter turned to address the rest of the room. "Let me be clear," he said, his voice carrying effortlessly to the farthest corners of the auditorium. "I am not here to disrupt this school or its mission. However, I will not stand idly by while my daughter, or any student, is mistreated in the name of discipline. If St. Augustine's wishes to continue operating with integrity, changes must be made." The room erupted into whispers once more, this time tinged with excitement rather than fear. Students leaned toward one another, exchanging eager comments. Teachers exchanged uneasy glances, unsure whether to feel relieved or apprehensive. Meanwhile, Ms. Langley seemed to shrink further, her earlier bravado completely evaporated. Sensing victory within reach, General Carter turned back to Ms. Langley. "Effective immediately, I demand an emergency meeting with the school board. Until then, no further action will be taken against my daughter or anyone else without proper justification." "Do I make myself clear?" Ms. Langley hesitated, visibly torn between defiance and submission. Finally, she gave a curt nod. "Yes, sir." Without another word, General Carter stepped away from the stage and walked down the aisle, his boots clicking rhythmically against the floor. As he passed Emily's row, he paused briefly, locking eyes with her. There was no smile, no gesture of affection, but the look in his eyes said everything. He was proud of her. He understood. And he had her back. After the assembly ended, the school buzzed with activity. Groups of students huddled together discussing what had just happened. Many praised Emily for standing up to Ms. Langley, while others admitted they'd been too afraid to speak out themselves. Even some teachers approached Emily cautiously, offering quiet words of support. Lila found her near the lockers, grinning ear to ear. "Did you see her face? She looked like she'd seen a ghost." Emily managed a small laugh, though her nerves were still raw. "I can't believe Dad did that. I mean, I knew he cared, but wow." "He came through like a superhero," Lila said, slinging an arm around Emily's shoulders. "And now everyone knows Ms. Langley isn't untouchable." Despite the relief washing over her, Emily couldn't shake the lingering tension. What would happen next? Would the school board side with Ms. Langley, or would they listen to reason? The uncertainty gnawed at her, even as she allowed herself to bask in the momentary triumph. Later that evening, Emily sat alone in her dorm room, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her hair was still intact, flowing freely past her shoulders. Running her fingers through it, she thought about her mother and all the memories tied to those strands. For the first time in days, she felt hopeful, not just for herself, but for everyone who deserved better than what Ms. Langley had been dishing out. Her phone buzzed on the desk, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a text from her father. "Proud of you, kiddo. Keep fighting the good fight." Emily smiled softly, clutching the phone to her chest. Whatever came next, she knew she wasn't alone anymore. The emergency meeting with the school board took place the following morning, in a small, stuffy conference room that smelled faintly of old books and polished wood. The air was thick with tension as General Carter, Ms. Langley, the principal, and several members of the board sat around a rectangular table. Emily wasn't allowed to attend. Students weren't permitted in such discussions, but she couldn't stop thinking about it. Every creak of the hallway outside her dorm room made her wonder if someone was coming to deliver news. Meanwhile, Lila stayed glued to her side, offering constant reassurance. "Your dad's got this," she said firmly, flipping through a magazine, without really reading it. "He didn't storm into that auditorium just to back down now." Emily nodded, though her stomach churned with nerves. She trusted her father completely, but she also knew how stubborn people like Ms. Langley could be. What if the board decided to side with her? What if they dismissed the evidence altogether? Inside the conference room, things were heating up quickly. General Carter wasted no time laying out his case. He spread the stolen documents across the table, pointing to specific examples of disproportionate punishments handed down by Ms. Langley. His tone remained calm but unyielding, each word laced with authority. "This is not discipline," he said, tapping a finger on one particularly damning report. "This is abuse of power. Students are being humiliated, ostracized, and traumatized, all under the guise of enforcing rules. Tell me, does shaving a child's head align with your mission statement? Does banning someone from extracurricular activities for mismatched socks reflect the values you claim to uphold?" One of the board members, an elderly woman with silver hair and sharp eyes, leaned forward, studying the papers intently. "These incidents are troubling," she admitted after a long pause. "But we must consider context. Perhaps there were extenuating circumstances we're unaware of." Ms. Langley seized the opportunity, speaking up for the first time since the meeting began. "Exactly," she said, her voice trembling slightly but regaining some of its usual edge. "Each situation is unique. These decisions were made with the students' best interests in mind. Sometimes tough love is necessary." General Carter's jaw tightened, but he didn't raise his voice. Instead, he turned to the principal, who had been unusually quiet throughout the discussion. "Sir, do you agree with these methods? Is this truly what you believe is best for the students?" The principal shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly caught between loyalty to Ms. Langley and the undeniable weight of the evidence before him. After a moment, he cleared his throat and spoke haltingly. While I understand the need for structure, I must admit, some of these actions seem excessive. We may have gone too far in certain cases. Ms. Langley shot him a betrayed look, but the damage was done. The cracks in her defenses were widening, and everyone in the room could see it. As the debate continued, emotions ran high. Some board members sided with Ms. Langley, arguing that strict enforcement was essential to maintaining order. Others leaned toward General Carter's perspective, horrified by the extent of the punishments described in the documents. The argument grew heated, voices rising until finally the elderly woman with the sharp eyes slammed her hand on the table. "Enough!" she barked, silencing the room instantly. She looked directly at Ms. Langley, her expression stern. Whether or not these actions were justified, the fact remains that they've caused significant distress among students and their families. Public perception matters, especially for an institution like ours. If word of this gets out, it could tarnish our reputation irreparably. Ms. Langley paled visibly, realizing the gravity of the situation. For all her bluster, she understood the implications of scandal better than anyone else in the room. After another tense round of deliberation, the board reached a decision. Ms. Langley would be placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation into her conduct. In the meantime, the school's disciplinary policies would. The weeks that followed Ms. Langley's suspension felt like a fresh start for everyone at St. Augustine's Academy. The oppressive atmosphere that had hung over the school for so long began to lift, replaced by a sense of relief and cautious optimism. Students who had once tiptoed around the halls now walked with their heads held higher. Teachers seemed less rigid, more approachable, as if they too were breathing easier now that the shadow of fear had been lifted. For Emily, life took on a new rhythm. She no longer dreaded waking up in the morning, or dreading what might happen during the day. Her hair, which she'd fought so hard to keep, became a symbol of resilience, not just for herself but for others. Every time she caught her reflection in the mirror, she remembered why she'd refused to give in. It wasn't just about her. It was about standing up against unfairness even when it felt impossible. One afternoon, while sitting in the library finishing an assignment, Emily noticed a group of younger students huddled nearby, whispering excitedly. At first, she thought nothing of it. Kids often gathered there to gossip or plan secret club meetings. But then one of them glanced over and waved shyly. "Hi, Emily," the girl said softly before ducking her head back into the circle. Curious, Emily packed up her things and wandered over. "Hey," she greeted them warmly. "What's going on?" The same girl spoke up again, this time with a little more confidence. We're starting a kind of support group for students who feel like they don't fit in or get treated unfairly. We wanted to ask if you'd help us." Emily blinked, surprised by the request. "Me? Why me?" "Because you stood up to Ms. Langley," another student chimed in eagerly. "You showed us that it's okay to fight back if something isn't right. We want to do the same thing, make sure no one else has to go through what you did." Her heart swelled with pride and responsibility. These kids looked up to her, trusted her to guide them. It was a lot to take in, but deep down, she knew it was something she couldn't turn away from. "Of course," she said, finally smiling. "I'll help however I can." Over the next few days, Emily threw herself into helping the group organize their efforts. They decided to call themselves the Alliance, a name suggested by Lila, who insisted it sounded powerful and inspiring. Together they brainstormed ways to promote fairness and kindness within the school. Some ideas were simple, like creating posters encouraging students to speak out if they saw injustice. Others were bolder, like hosting a school-wide assembly where students could share stories of times they'd felt mistreated and how they overcame it. Lila played a big role in keeping spirits high during these planning sessions. "This is huge," she declared one evening as they sat cross-legged on Emily's dorm room floor, surrounded by scribbled notes and half-empty soda cans. "You're basically becoming a legend here," Emily laughed, rolling her eyes. "Don't exaggerate. I'm just trying to help people feel safe." "Safe and inspired," Lila corrected, grinning. "Don't sell yourself short, Em. You've already made a difference. As word spread about the alliance, more students joined in, eager to be part of something meaningful. Even some teachers offered their support, lending advice or volunteering to chaperone events. Slowly but surely, the culture at St. Augustine's began to shift. Conversations became more open, relationships more genuine. People started looking out for each other instead of staying silent when they saw something wrong. But perhaps the most surprising change came from Emily herself. Before all of this, she'd always seen herself as quiet and unremarkable, someone who blended into the background rather than stood out. Now she realized she had a voice, one that could inspire and empower others. And the more she used it, the stronger it became. One evening, as she prepared for bed, her phone buzzed with a video call from her father. She picked it up, smiling when his familiar face appeared on the screen. "Hey, Dad," she greeted him. "What's up?" "I heard about your little project," he said, his tone light but proud. "Sounds like you're making quite the impact." Emily shrugged modestly, though warmth spread through her chest. "It's nothing major, just trying to help people, feel like they belong." "It's more than that," he countered firmly. "You're teaching them to stand up for themselves. That's important, not just here, but everywhere. I'm proud of you, kiddo." His words lingered long after they ended the call. For years, Emily had struggled to connect with her father, feeling like she could never live up to his expectations. But now, she saw him differently, not as the stern military man who demanded perfection, but as someone who understood strength and courage better than anyone else. By the end of the semester, the Alliance had grown into a cornerstone of the EIME school community. Their first assembly was a resounding success, with dozens of students stepping forward to share their experiences. Some cried as they spoke, others smiled through nervous laughter. But every story carried the same message. They weren't alone anymore. Change was possible, and together, they could make it happen. Afterward, as Emily stood backstage watching the crowd disperse, Lila nudged her shoulder playfully. "Told you you're a legend." Emily shook her head, smiling, despite herself. Not a legend, just someone who refused to stay quiet. And maybe that was enough. Time flew by, and before anyone realized it, the end of the school year was upon them. The once oppressive halls of St. Augustine's Academy now buzzed with excitement instead of dread. Students laughed freely, shared stories without fear, and looked forward to the future with a sense of hope they hadn't felt before. Emily walked through those same corridors she'd entered months ago as a nervous outsider, but this time she moved with purpose, her head held high, her hair flowing behind her like a banner of triumph. Graduation day arrived, bright and clear, the kind of morning that made everything feel possible. The entire student body gathered on the sprawling lawn outside the main building, rows of chairs neatly arranged under billowing white tents. Parents, siblings, and friends filled the seats, snapping photos and exchanging hugs. Emily scanned the crowd, her eyes landing on her father standing tall near the front, his uniform crisp and polished. Beside him sat Lila's mom, waving enthusiastically when she caught sight of them. As the ceremony began, Emily found herself reflecting on how far she'd come since that first terrifying day at St. Augustine's. Back then, she'd been so focused on blending in, on avoiding attention at all costs. But now she understood that standing out wasn't such a bad thing. Not if it meant making a difference. She thought about the younger students who had joined the Alliance, their faces lighting up whenever they talked about creating change. She thought about the teachers who had quietly supported her, risking their own comfort to do what was right. And most of all, she thought about her mother, whose memory had guided her every step of the way. When it was time for the valedictorian speech, everyone expected the usual platitudes: gratitude toward teachers, nostalgic reflections on friendships, dreams for the future. But Emily had something else in mind. As she stepped up to the podium, clutching her notes tightly, the sea of faces turned toward her, waiting. "Hi," she began softly, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm not great at speeches, so I'll keep this short." A ripple of laughter, spread through the audience, easing some of her nerves. She took a deep breath and continued. When I first came here, I didn't think I belonged. I thought being quiet and invisible was the best way to survive. But over time, I learned something important, that staying silent doesn't protect you. In fact, sometimes it lets unfairness win. This year taught me that speaking up isn't just about fighting for yourself. It's about fighting for others, too. She paused, glancing at her father, who gave her an almost imperceptible nod of encouragement. Then she turned to look at her classmates, many of whom smiled back at her knowingly. I want to thank my friend Lila, who never let me give up, even when things felt impossible. I want to thank our teachers, especially those who stood by us during tough times. And I want to thank my dad, who showed me that strength isn't about following rules blindly. It's about doing what's right, no matter how hard it is. Her gaze drifted upward, as if searching for someone beyond the tent. Most of all, I want to thank my mom. She used to braid my hair every morning and tell me that beauty comes from within. She taught me to hold on to the things that matter most, and to never let anyone take them away. A few tears slipped down her cheeks, but she wiped them away quickly, smiling faintly. So, to everyone graduating today, don't be afraid to stand out. Don't be afraid to speak up, because your voice matters, and together we can make sure no one has to face the world alone. The applause that followed was thunderous, echoing across the lawn like waves crashing against the shore. Emily stepped back from the podium, her heart swelling with pride and gratitude. For the first time in her life, she truly felt seen, not as the quiet girl hiding in the shadows, but as someone capable of inspiring others. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light over the campus, Emily wandered to the spot where she and Lila had first hatched their plan to sneak into Ms. Langley's office. It seemed surreal now, almost like a story from another lifetime. Lila joined her moments later, holding 2 cups of hot chocolate.